Hello and welcome back to Sabrina Talks. This is episode 4. Again, I'm going over the names of God. Dwelling place. Reference Psalm 90:1. Lord, thou hast been our dwelling place in all generation. This psalm may be the oldest in the entire book of Psalms because it is attributed to Moses, who led the Israelites during their years of wandering in the wilderness. This was a time before they settled in Canaan, when they did not have permanent houses. They lived in tents, which they moved from place to place. Reference Numbers 9:17 and Joshua 3:14. In spite of their Spartan living arrangements, they still thought of God as their ultimate dwelling place. His presence followed them wherever they moved, and his faithfulness continued from one generation to the next. God is still a dwelling place for his people. Whether we live in a mobile home or a mansion, we find him all the joys and comfort of home. Everlasting God. Reference Genesis 21:33. And Abraham planted a grave in Beersheba and called there on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. Abraham had moved from place to place for several years in the land of Canaan, the territory that God had promised to his descendants. Reference Genesis 12:1-5. Finally, he decided to make a site known as Beersheba, the center of the territory where he would graze his flocks and herds. There he dug a well and planted a grove of trees to mark the site as his settling down place. At Beersheba, it was appropriate that Abraham called on the name of the everlasting God, the one without beginning and end, who would never cease to be. He would guide Abraham into the future and fulfill his promise that Abraham's offspring would eventually populate this entire region. God kept his promise, but it took a while. It was more than 5 centuries after Abraham's time before the Israelites conquered this land and made it their own. We should remember that the everlasting God does not watch the clock like we humans do. Father. Reference Isaiah 64:8. But now, O Lord, thou art our Father. We are the clay, and thou art potter, and we all are the work of thy hand. In this verse, the prophet Isaiah declares that God has a role in shaping his people. Just as earthly fathers participate in the creative process of bringing children into the world, this is one of the few places in the Old Testament where God is referred to as Father. Reference Deuteronomy 32:6, Psalms 89:26, Isaiah 63:16, Malachi 2:10. By contrast, Father as a name for God occurs often in the New Testament, particularly on the lips of Jesus. Reference Matthew 26:39, Luke 23:34, John 17:1. People of the Old Testament times generally did not think of God in fatherly terms. To them, he was an all-powerful being who stood above and beyond the relationships and events of everyday life. It took Jesus to show us that God is a loving Father. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Reference John 3:16. Bye.